The color is how she perceives herself. She says fiery, bright, whatever. You see yourself as a fiery, bright person. And then obviously elaborate on these. I'm keeping them short for time. You can spend 5-10 minutes talking about her personality, how she sees herself, asking her whether she does see herself that way, and this gets her to offer up intimate information about herself, which you can then use later. And then the animal is how she thinks other people perceive her. She's a dolphin, free, intelligent, so people see you. You think that people see you that way. And then the last one on the beach is how she feels about sex. So the two emotions she has there. Obviously, any girl who's standing on the beach with her feet in the water is going to have a positive emotional association. So you see it as though she sees, she's free-spirited and open and in touch with her sexuality. There's a million of these. You could make them up off the top of your head. But that's one that I use because it's fairly short. You can make the whole thing happen in less than 5 minutes, whereas the cube seems to take like 20, so people spend like half an hour doing it.
Now, real quick, you've already made several references to the cube, and there are some listeners that might not be aware of that routine. And a lot of love systems instructors have used that very successfully. So, would you mind just going over what the cube is, real quick?
Sure. I mean, there's nothing special about the cube. The cube, like 4 questions, like palm reading, or like anything you could just make up on the fly, is just a structure that makes it not weird for you to be delivering so many cold reads in a row, and especially, kind of intimate cold reads like how somebody feels about sex or death or whatever, isn't the type of thing you would normally say to somebody. But as soon as you start talking about, hey, we're doing this 4 questions thing from Japan, or we're doing a palm read or whatever, then a woman is going to accept more readily what you're talking about. So the cube specifically, there's a book called The Cube that I recommend that you not get, because there's no need. We're not trying to do this to actually deliver to deliver an accurate psychological profile off of something that, I would think probably has pretty dubious validity anyway. But the object here is to actually just deliver good cold reads that's going to increase your chances of being with a specific woman. So what you need to do, first you'll set the cube, you'll set it up, say, hey, this is something I learned, and explain, give some story about why where you learned it and why you're going to do it. And basically you just ask a woman to, create a picture in her head. And first you make her, create a picture of a cube. And then you say, okay, now, in the same image, I want you also to put a ladder. And in the same image, give her some time to think about it. In the same image, you ask her to put a horse. And you you make sure that they've got, relevant details about these 3 objects. And they don't say anything about them. They put them one at a time in the image in their head. And then afterwards, they explain the picture to you. They describe each of the objects and how they relate to each other. And you ask some probing questions, and then from that, you deliver whatever cold reads you want. Then you relate them back to the cube a little bit, or, well, you had a lot of rungs on your ladder. That means you're pretty comfortable, having a wide array of acquaintances, but my intuition with you is there's still, a small number of people that you're very close to. I actually did that backwards. That would be something where they have a very small number of rungs on their ladder. Or if they have a large number of rungs, you just flip it around. You're like, well, you're somebody that even though you've got a few people that you're really close to, you're not one of those people that does everything in your life with your one best friend, and you don't hang out with other people or meet other people or find them valuable. So you're pretty open to having a wide circle of acquaintances. Again, it's just a variation on the sometimes X, sometimes Y structure.
What are some pitfalls with cold reads?
Being wrong, being blatantly wrong. In which case, again, it comes back to something we've talked about a lot, it's just the flinch factor. Being wrong is okay as long as you don't act like you're backpedaling and worrying about it. They will correct you and then use that information to tease them or elicit more information. Be like, all right, she's the good one, she's the bad one. No, totally, she's the bad one. All right, let me see your hand. Do the finger length routine. All right, good. I gotta stay away from her. She's the good one. I gotta stick with her. She's safer. Hug her, pull her in. Use it in a way that is useful. Don't flinch and be like, oh, sorry, I'm wrong. Again, it's just let it bounce off with you. Go in the right direction, and just keep moving forward. Don't worry about being wrong. You're gonna be wrong a lot of the time with these. They're bullshit. You're making them up off the top of your head. Other pitfalls?
Yeah, I think there's a couple that I can think of off the top of my head. One, as we mentioned earlier, is coming across too cheesy.
Yeah.
And that'll happen if, the more you use an elaborate structure that doesn't seem to have any place in the venue or in the stage of the interaction you're at, the more this is likely to happen. So I'll give you some examples. If you have tarot cards with you at a bar, that's a problem. But that's an example of what we're talking about in terms of cheesiness. If you've got some weird props with you that would require you to do this, or if you offer somebody a palm reading within the first minute of meeting them, that's going to come across as being weird. Usually what I'll do for that is I'll actually drop a reference to palm reading at some point in the conversation, and then as soon as you do that, every woman in the group is going to want their palm read. And if you jump through that hoop, you're going to end up losing some value most of the time. So what I'll do is I'll mention it, playfully refuse to give them the palm read, and then it'll come up again and again over the course of the conversation, and then eventually, with the woman I'm interested in, I will, quote, give in, unquote, and do that. So there's a cheesiness factor of something just coming, being inappropriate and out of place. Another related to that is too many cold reads too early in the conversation. Like, a few of them is fine, but you after a while there's diminishing returns, and you start becoming this guy is kind of creepy and knows everything about us guy. Or they start to figure out, wow, he's told us about 20 different things about ourselves, and he just walked up. He must be doing something weird. So that's a second factor. And the third is a little bit more subtle. But once you're sort of in a more intimate setting, maybe a private conversation or one-on-one with a woman at a venue, and you deliver, a great reading of the cube or a palm reading or just 4 questions or just a whole bunch of great reads, she may go back to her friends and say, wow, this is the most amazing thing in the world. You have to have this guy read your palm. And then you've got, her 5 friends all lining up wanting their palms read. And that's going to be, among other things, very boring for the entire group once it's all done. And it'll also stretch your ability to create new and unique cold reads. So those are all things to watch out for.
Okay, now, say a cold read is successful. It worked effectively for you. The next thing to do would be what?
Well, it's just a tool in the arsenal, right? Like, it's one of the many things that we use that's mixed into all the other tools. That's why one of the important things that Savoy said was don't, after you listen to the CD, you might want to start using more cold reads. But don't get caught in the trap of just being cold read guy. You still need to be able to tell a story, to do just a routine that will teach them something that isn't a cold read, to be able to make them laugh, which is probably one of the most important things. I would say in terms of how you use the cold reads, the opening and the transition, the early phase, you can use them in a silly way. You can seem like you're kidding around. All right, she's trouble, I gotta watch out for her. All right, you seem like a school teacher. I don't know, you just seem like a save the world type. You got kind of a frumpy vibe about you. Just kidding, punch her in the arm. It's fun. You're just joking around, using it to tease them and elicit responses, emotional responses from them. As you get into, say, the retraction, you might, depending on your identity, a lot of this will change. If you have a more serious identity, you can use more serious cold reads and attraction because you want to come off as thoughtful and intuitive. If you have a more outgoing, outrageous identity, like a big personality, you continue using them as jokes. One way to use it in qualification is to say, were you fat when you were in high school or middle school or something? And they'll say yes. Because you have an awesome personality. And it seems like when you're growing up, a lot of times the girls that had the best personalities were kind of fat or just awkward or not popular. And then later on, when they got really hot, they still had the personality that they had when they were in middle school because they had to develop it then because they didn't have the looks to follow it up. So, I was wondering if you were fat or awkward in middle school. It's a bit of a neg, but it's also a statement of interest in a lot of ways because you're telling her you like her. And then if she goes out of her way to qualify why she has a good personality, it's a good way to use a cold read in qualification. But again, that's more serious. Then once you're into comfort, some of the stuff that Savoy was saying earlier about understanding her world, understanding how she thinks, the deeper, more personal stuff, that's where that takes place.
The reason I asked you what the next step was, obviously you can use cold reads in a lot of different phases. But say you're doing a palm read as a cold read, or say you're saying you look like the good one, you look like a bad one.
Well, there's a difference. You're doing them at different times, right? Like, you look like the good one, you look like the bad one is a minute in, 30 seconds in. A palm read is 10 minutes in, 20 minutes in the set. There's different phases. Everything has to go where it belongs. If you do one thing would work in one spot and totally bomb in another. This is just the principle that goes throughout pickup. So those aren't the same things.
Yeah, I mean, a cold read is a tool. It's not a strategy. So the only strategies that you've got when you go meet a woman is you want to progress emotionally, you want to progress physically, and you want to progress logistically. So anything that you do has to be done to advance you on one or more of those 3 tracks. So a cold read can help you advance. I mean, we've been talking mostly emotionally because that's where the cold reads will fit in. A cold read will help you advance along the emotional progression model. And yeah, it can, as we talked about earlier, it can help physically a little bit, and can even help logistically a tiny bit in terms of, hey, before we do this, the cube, we got to go somewhere a little bit quieter, or it's going to take half an hour to do this. We don't really have time right now. Let's meet up tomorrow after work and grab a drink, and then I can show this to you or whatever. So it can help you advance logistically a little bit, but its primary focus is emotionally. So by itself, it can transition. You can use it in attraction. You can even use it a bit in qualification, and then you can use it again in comfort, as the Don was saying. Another thing I want to say about that is you can deliver kind of the same sort of cold read, but you would shorten it up a lot if you're going to deliver it earlier in the interaction. For example, the longer one that I was giving about a woman's reality before, you can shorten that to a couple of sentences with something like, wow, I bet a lot of people put you on a pedestal, and that kind of, in a way, in a way you like it, but in a way that kind of bugs you because a lot of times people give you credit for stuff that you don't deserve. And that can resonate with a lot of beautiful women. And that's just a very short thing that you can deliver that in the attraction phase because it helps you show social intuition.
And that's true throughout the whole structure. Things early are going to be shorter and go for a bigger impact, and then you lengthen them and go more in depth later on as you get into comfort. Everything's got to be done in its right place. What works later doesn't work early. What worked early may backfire later. So just keep that in mind.
There are two other things you can do with that. Two other purposes that cold reads have, or two other things that you can do with cold reads. One is to tell her something about yourself, or to imply something about yourself while delivering that kind of cold read. And two is to frame her in a certain way. So I'll talk real quick about both of those. Telling her a little bit about yourself, the more that you seem... it's something that I will always throw into any kind of longer cold read, especially when I start talking about, her and the types of relationships she's had and the types of men she's interested in. I would pause, stop, look at her, and be like, wow, the most boring thing in the world for you would be a pushover. The kind of guy that's constantly seeking your approval, constantly seeking your attention, somebody who's just, you want somebody who you can share, who brings something to your life, and you can share stuff from his life, as opposed to somebody that's just, where you're the sun that he revolves around. That kind of line, in addition to sort of really striking at her reality and being who she is, also implies you're not that kind of pushover guy, because you wouldn't be saying it if you were. So that's a kind of thing where you can imply a lot of things, attractive qualities about yourself by a judicious choice of cold read. And for everybody listening to this interview, I would strongly recommend you use that line that I just gave as often as you can, at least until you've internalized it, because almost every woman will react with her eyes lit up when you say that. And not that it's going to get you with that particular woman, but if you ever needed any more emphasis on the idea that you should not be the pushover guy, and you should not make a woman the center of your life, and that's not attractive to women, this will emphasize that. The second point that I want to make is about framing a woman a specific way. So, and the Don was alluding to this earlier with his 4 questions thing, where he's talking about, when he has a woman describe something and he says, well, that's how you feel about sex, and he'll make it positive. You're very open, you're very free, you can, you're not so worried about what society thinks, you're willing to be impulsive sexually. You're framing, unless she objects to that, you're framed her in that way, and she will feel more comfortable in acting that way, and she knows that you will accept and approve of her in that way.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, the idea of framing her the way you want her to be is really important. If you frame her in a way that, if you say things like, when you open, you're like, why aren't you guys smiling? You guys don't seem like you're having fun. They'll act like they're not having fun back to you, right off the opener. In a more in-depth way, if you frame a girl like she's the good girl and she's going to be, she's well-behaved and she's so nice and sweet, she'll behave more in that way, which is maybe what you want, but at the same time, even if she is that way, you still want her to feel open sexually and free around you. So you want to create the spontaneous, open frame that you put on her. So there's different ways to do that. The way that Savoya just said was one great way. But I try to create this whole sort of carpe diem vibe that goes through comfort routines that I have that talk about the importance of following your instincts, doing the things that you want. And you can say things to her as you get to know her and as she agrees with the stories you're telling her or seems to like them. But you know what I like about you? You seem really spontaneous and open. Like you're like a person who follows their impulses, which is cool. I'm the same way. Not to the point of being impulsive and crazy, but like a lot of times I believe in what my gut tells me, that it's the right thing. And I usually follow that even more than my head. And that's gotten me where I am today, and I feel like that's a big thing. You seem very spontaneous too. However you want to do it, but paint her in a way that she's creative, open, spontaneous, does the things she wants to do in life. So it's a really important idea to keep in mind. The things that you cold read into her, she will start to behave more in that direction.
Okay. And I know that somewhere down the line we're likely going to produce a CD on warm reads, but real quick, can we maybe get the differences between cold reads and warm reads?